Unions are like a butter dish. You might not think it's necessary until you're leaving butter frozen in the fridge, and then you stop and think, gee, I should really get around to getting one of those fancy butter dishes, huh? That was my attempt at an intro, folks. Let me know what you thought. But anyways, don't know if you've been paying attention to labor news. There's a huge unionization push in the US the last few months. Highlighted, most recently, I just did a video about Amazon labor union getting the first US union victory in an Amazon warehouse. And there are a lot of other strikes and union elections going on throughout the country. But today, I want to focus on one of the more weirdly successful union pushes in America, and that is the one we see in Starbucks stores. Now, before we get into how hyped I am for the union push, I do want to point out my ideal world is one with increased worker cooperative ownership. That is pretty damn close to, workers owning the means of their production, quite literally. And unions are a big, noteworthy step back from that, because it's this third-party sort of organization, really just to bargain with the proprietary owner. It is, and it brings a little bit of democracy in there, but it's not, crucially, the goal here. It only exists as something worth hyping up because it's the best we'll ever probably get in America. But even if it's not my ideal world, it's still cool to see. So let's get to it. So the trend of Starbucks stores pushing to unionize started last December in, I think, Ithaca. And let's read through this story to refresh up on the details of the matter. On Thursday, workers at a Starbucks in Buffalo voted to form a union, making it the first of more than 8,000 corporate Starbucks locations in the US to unionize. For the employees at the store, this means they'll begin to negotiate a contract for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. For everyone else, this could spur more unionization across the US. Hint, it did. And we also have oh, perfect, there's a graphic for what I was about to say. Union membership is, I think, just about as low as it's ever been. However, at the same time, approval for unions is reaching its highest point. It seems that the series of Gallup polls from the 60s polled how in favor people are of unions, and its low point was, what is that? That's probably like 2009. That's probably some Tea Party Fox News shit that made people hate like the AFL-CIO or some such. Now we're back up to 68%, which is pretty great. And it should be noted, there is a disconnect between the approval rating of unionization and the actual rate of unionization. And that's because, as this article brings up, companies since the 70s have been getting into a lot of shadier-ish, like firing union organizers. And in the last half of the last century, labor laws started to allow more of that to happen, or they would lower the penalties, or they would defang the organizations meant to enforce those penalties and laws. And to tell us maybe a little bit more about how difficult it is, let's listen to the, oh shit, it's the Mad Money guy. That probably means he's gonna be an asshole. Let's see what he has to say to the Starbucks union organizer.
Well, if you're not taken seriously, would you ever go on strike?
I think there are definitely options in the future. I mean, I hope that they would take us seriously. We're their brand, we're their name, and they've not really led by example so far in terms of how they've fought this union from the moment we went public.
She brought up something interesting there that kind of points to this interesting dynamic with Starbucks as far as unions are concerned. And I think it means that we ought to give a whole lot of credit to anyone and a whole lot of support to anyone out there unionizing Starbucks, because there's this weird dynamic where part of your bargaining power is lost by the fact that any mid-sized city these days has like a dozen Starbuckses. It's hard if only one of your shops is unionized. It's really difficult to have a whole lot of bargaining power, because then there's another one right there too. They're not even really being, they are being scab workers. There's another store right down the street to be scab workers. So that saps a little bit of bargaining power out of the union, but another way that it kind of increases their bargaining power is that there are a bunch of jobs on the same mid-tier as Starbucks for folks to find if something goes wrong. So it does create this kind of like, I've got nothing to lose dynamic, where it's like, yeah, you could fire all of us if you'd like, but the shop might shut down, and you know what? We'll find plenty okay jobs elsewhere in the city. You know, we can go work with our experience at a unionized Starbucks, or we can work at a Dutch Bros or some such. Hey folks, Editing Piley here. I forgot to make the distinction that while most laborers can use their departure as a sort of bargaining chip, it's especially important in the case of a Starbucks worker, because Starbucks' business model is predicated on being everywhere all of the time. There's a road in the college-y part of my town which has on either end of like a city block a Starbucks on each side. So you could look at that and say, well, the laborers lose a little bit of power because people can just go to the Starbucks on the other end of the street. But at the same time, Starbucks opened a second shop on that street for a reason. They clearly wanted to sort of try to dominate this section of the city and this part of the market. So if you take away their ability to dominate the market, you're really hitting them where it hurts. Felt that distinction was important enough to make before we go forward, so let's get back to the video. So while obviously these negotiations take a while, it seems as it currently stands, Starbucks has not recognized these unions yet, which is kind of garbage, but I don't know what else to expect, because let's start to get to the fun, seedy underbelly of this story, and that is how Starbucks has responded, because in the 4 months since the first Starbucks in Ithaca unionized, there have been, I think in total as of today, 16 stores that have voted to unionize. On Thursday and Friday, workers at 6 stores in upstate New York voted to unionize, according to the NLRB, bringing the total number of company-owned stores where they've backed a union to 16. It also sounds like there's one in Kansas, who at time of recording has votes being tallied, but the outcome is unsure, so we'll see in the coming hours how that goes. And it's important to note for scale, as big a wave as there is here, it seems only about 200 of the 9,000 stores have done so yet. Those are rookie numbers. We really need to bump those up. Ooh, here's a good sign. Union elections filings were up more than 50% during the last 6 months than the 6 months prior to that, which is super cool. Love to see that. And then, of course, you run into the issue with austerity and budget cuts, where the organizations meant to check this sort of thing are struggling to staff people to make sure people aren't committing crimes. Love that. Of course, Starbucks gets into the typical anti-union stuff of having meetings to persuade them to not unionize. So here's a clip from Means TV of a worker attempting to unionize, describing how they were getting intimidated at work by their managers.
So I got hired in August, and multiple weeks went by, no training. Before I even poured 1 cup of coffee, I had already been attending these anti-union meetings.
It's supposed to be them listening to us about, things in our store that we want to be improved, but it's usually the first 25, 30 minutes is them talking at us. At this point, it's all anti-union. It started off, the first 2 meetings were kind of, we're here to help you, you raised your hand, we're so excited to be here and fix things, and then they've gotten they've broken us into smaller groups. They've scheduled these so that the most vocal of us are in one group and the quieter people are in other groups.
I started thinking it was kind of strange, because for a store that was so short-staffed and had so many call-outs and really needed new people to work, I had been hired multiple weeks before that, and I would have been ready to train the very next day, and I was basically just sitting around waiting to get trained. Is it because they saw me talking to union supporters?
So yeah, that's the type of finagling they try to get around legally, where it's this open-ended session to discuss problems in the stores and try to be like, oh, we're here to help. And then they just sit you down and say, unions will kill your family. And you could tell in the ways they talk about divvying people up based on like separating the vocal union supporters from the not. This is very strategic.
You don't have to have a terrible workplace to form a union. I think the reason we're forming a union at Starbucks is, exactly the opposite case. I think that's kind of baffled management here. They've constantly tried to twist the narrative into, well, everything's so good, we have all these benefits, why are you doing this? Has been kind of their messaging or their response to our organizing. And we're saying, yeah, the benefits are great, we do like the benefits we do have, but we want to improve them, we want to make them better. And also we want a democratic say in our workplace. Why should 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, of our lives, not be democratic, should lack like us having any representation or say or protections. I mean, like that's what they fundamentally don't understand or don't want to understand is that, this movement isn't about, just terrible workplaces and, conditions, you'd maybe find like Amazon distribution centers. It's about like the conditions all of us face at work. All our wages have stagnated since, the 70s. If we don't have a democratic say in our workplace, we're only going to be making less. It's a matter of really like, life and death and, actually having a future for, the children we do have and the workers that come after us. Because if we don't take a stand and unionize, none of this is going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And, coming out of COVID, I think we've seen how bad it can get and how bad it could potentially be if nothing changes. So
that brings up a really interesting point to discuss about what it means for Starbucks to be one of the centers of high unionization. Because, like you said, Amazon is more known for being, put the graphic up on screen editing, Piley, of the rate of injuries relative to others in the industry at Amazon. But Starbucks has good benefits, decent wages. I think there's even some extent to which stores like help people with transition surgery, like shit like that. So the union busters are like going to their literal playbook and they say like, but we have a good environment. And they say, oh, well, it's not about that. We want a say in our workplace. And then they get stun locked and they go, we give you benefits. Why aren't you grateful, you peon? Speaking of the shitty ways that union busting has been existing at Starbucks shops, the labor board, which I'm shocked to hear that the labor board is doing their job here. They determined that Starbucks illegally fired the Memphis 7, which was just a group of 7 activists at a Memphis store, because they were union members, which is crazy. Again, this is the type of thing that just happens, After addressing complaints that his shops have been illegally firing people, Chief Executive Officer Howard Schultz made the comment, "We can't ignore what's happening in the country as it relates to the companies throughout the country being assaulted by the threat of unionization," which isn't so much a lie, so much as it is just admitting that unions are a threat to his desired dictatorial rule of the workplace. But it says a lot that people like him will use words like assault to describe, hey, these people have a say. We can't just dictate the terms for them. So here's a great pair of sentences here. You have the fact that a 2019 study of claims filed with the NLRB found that workers were allegedly fired illegally between 20 and 30% of elections. However, the labor board lacks the authority to impose punitive damages for violations of the law, which is where you get this line in the story that they'll issue a complaint unless the company settles, which triggered my brain immediately. I was like, what is issuing a complaint? Oh yeah, that's probably all they have the power to do, is to just write a letter saying, you've done the bad thing. So even though it is a shockingly, at least allegedly, common occurrence, fucking nothing this labor board can do about it. But don't worry, folks. While he may seem heartless, saying that the working class trying to have a say in the process and have their desires heard through a democratic organization. The fact that he calls them assaulting may come off as callous, but don't worry, he is tapped in to the common person's desires. So let's see his plan here for how he's gonna win people back over.
Sometime before the end of this calendar year, we are going to be in the NFT business.
Yeah, clearly, Howard, the time to get into the NFT games was April of 2022. You're really on the cutting edge there. But yeah, I think to me it says a lot about sort of the desperation from corporate management at Starbucks, that the response hours after some elections were held was to announce that they're dropping NFTs. So yeah, something to wrap up here that I find really interesting about the unionizing dynamic with Starbucks workplaces is the fact that the number of people is so small. You'd think that would favor management, that they could really focus in on, really, personalize their arguments, and that they'd have a bit more leverage over like the individuals. But it seems to be that such a tight-knit environment is, at least in these cases, really convenient for building solidarity. Like the fact that like Amazon's union vote was about 55% in favor of, 45% against. So you'd expect these margins to be like 11-9, but it's, in each case, one absolute bozo in the back is voting against it, and everyone else is like, yeah, this sounds great, sign me up. So it almost feels like because of the low number of staff involved, it makes it really easy for sort of grassroots organizing, because you don't need huge campaigns to reach, like, again, the Amazon union had like 6,000 eligible members they had to try to win over. There's 20 people here, that's it. That's smaller than most classes I had in high school. So anyways, this has probably been a pretty meandering video so far, so let me go back to full screen and let's wrap up here. Despite all of the barriers, management that's hostile, corporate, HR people coming in to subtly harass unionizing people, unionizing workers getting fired, or I've read stories here, maybe I'll try to pull one up or link it below, of people like suddenly getting put on like closing shifts when they always opened, or they'd get asked to close and open back to back, and then when they were late a couple of times because of that bizarre scheduling thing, all of a sudden, then they're fired. And it's not because they're unionizing, it's just suddenly their schedules changed in a way that made it likely they would be late, and then we fired them when they were late. All that sort of stuff is going against these unions, and yet there's a pretty big wave going forward. But regardless of the struggles, it is so cool to see that folks, in a fairly comfy job, or at least a better job than some others in the shitty market, it's nice to see that this is a place where, just for the genuine love of worker democracy and having a say in things, it's nice to see that that is the center of labor organizing at the moment, or that is a avenue through which we see this big push in America. Again, unions are not the end-all be-all of workers having a say in their workplace, but it is nice to see, regardless of my gripes with unions as a structure, every single time the vote comes through, you can see how happy it makes everybody. And what's better than a thing that makes a bunch of 20-somethings jump and go, woohoo! I personally can't think of a better state of being. But anyways, thanks for watching, everybody. Now, let's turn it on over to the pre-recorded outro. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video. Zoth, Revo Pregame, Emily, Kyle Foley, Jennifer Jones, Caffeine Unicorn, Goblin of the Year, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.